Hi everyone, today we are talking about the different types of visions. And before we get into this, I do want to say a word of warning here at the get-go. Like we talked about in the video on St. John of the Cross, we shouldn't be seeking these types of experiences. It is dangerous, and we, in doing so, can open ourselves up to nefarious influences. So just word of warning, this is never something you should try in any way to make happen on your own. This is all through the grace of God, and He gives it when He wills it. So the types of visions, according to St. Teresa of Avila, there are 4 different types of visions, and they come with varying degrees of trustworthiness. So the first type of vision is probably the least trustworthy, and this is sensory visions that appear to your physical eyes. So you will see an image appear in your field of vision in the real world, and it will seem to you like you're just seeing something that is actually there, just like you would see anything else. And from a personal example, this is the first more mystical experience I ever had was as a kid when my CCD class was preparing for First Communion. They took a bunch of us to the little chapel where there were 2 confessionals, and they had probably about 40 or 50 of us, little second graders, just praying, waiting to go to confession in preparation for our First Communion. And while I was praying, I remember just seeing appear in my peripheral vision over on my right, Christ standing at the front of this chapel watching all of us kids. And I remember this as a little kid praying and being like, whoa, when I looked over and then it was gone. And I went back to praying, and I remember thinking to myself, well, that was bizarre. I just had a little figment of my imagination, and I went back to praying, and there he popped up again. And again, I looked over and nothing. And this happened repeatedly about 4 times until I was like, no, I think this is actually something. I don't think I'm making this up because it keeps coming back. And so that's just an experience that I had that has definitely played a pivotal role, particularly in my reversion to the faith later in life. That's an experience that never really left me. But again, this is a category of vision that you have to be really careful with. You can't just trust any sort of vision that you have, because it's also, possible that that came from a nefarious source. Luckily I've seen only positive fruit in my life from that, and I have a hard time fathoming how that would be damaging to me. So I personally accept that as being authentic. But again, this is a category you have to be really careful with. The second category of visions are imaginative. So this is basically if I were to tell you, close your eyes and imagine, Christ standing before you, and you would concoct with your mind an image. That is similar to the experience of an imaginative vision, except you are not, it doesn't seem like you're personally concocting the image. This is another category that is rather suspect, because anything having to do with the senses or your imagination, the demonic has full access to. So you have to tread very lightly in trusting any images like this. A personal experience that I take as authentic for myself, and I have also had imaginative visions that seem very clear to me that they are inauthentic. Examples of those would be, I generally have a very quiet mind, and I have a tendency every once in a while, I'll get these random faces popping up in an imaginative vision, and they are a little disturbing. And so right off the bat, I say St. Michael prayer, binding prayer, or something along those lines, and they tend to go away. An example of an experience of this that I personally believe to be authentic was at a retreat weekend I was at the Shrine of Our Lady of Good Help in Wisconsin, which is the only approved Marian apparition site in the US. After Mass at this retreat, after receiving the Eucharist, I was praying, and I saw these giant eyes appeared before me, and it was part of a face, but I only really saw the eyes, and I just had this notion that this was God. And then it seemed as if God was reaching to grasp me and pull me into an embrace until I was absorbed into him. And that sounds very bizarre, but it was a very profound experience. And then there are two other kinds of visions that, well, St. Teresa of Avila, these are all from St. Teresa of Avila's autobiography. And again, she is the doctor of church on prayer. So this is her realm of expertise. So the two higher categories of visions, according to her, that are at less risk, that put you at less risk of deception, are the intellectual visions. And I have described some of these in some of my earliest videos, where it's not something you see with your eyes, it's not something you see in your imagination. She describes it more as something you see in your soul or in your spirit. I've described it as getting a deep seed of understanding that then your mind develops its own imagery for, but you're not actually with any sort of sense or with the perception of your imagination of vision perceiving anything. It's deeper than that. It's a little difficult to explain, but I have described this type of experience in earlier videos if you want to check those out. I have recently had a pretty profound experience that fit into this category, and this was again at the apparition site of Our Lady of Good Help in Wisconsin. I was praying in adoration, and Our Lady appeared to me very, very sorrowful, holding in her arms the child that I understood it was the child I had never had due to my own sinful habits. And they were sinful habits that I was not clearly aware were sinful or grave in the manner that would reflect the depth of Our Lady's sorrow. And it was an experience that had a profound effect on me. And the very next morning, I went straight to confession. And that also plays into how St. Teresa of Avila describes to assess whether or not your visions are true. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. The last type of vision is kind of completely different from the other three in that there is no sense of an image at all. And it's interesting that she puts these in the category of visions, but I can see how it doesn't really fit anywhere else. And this is the experience of just sensing the presence of a figure. So she describes sensing the presence of Christ being next to her. And she says, even though I saw nothing, I saw him there more clearly than I've ever seen anything without seeing anything. And I know I've had this experience with Our Lady and various saints where it's just like they just pop up next to you and you don't, like I said, you don't see anything, but it's extremely evident who it is. And so I guess the best way I can describe it is to describe kind of the qualities that I sensed when these figures decided to give me a visit. And let's see, we've got Our Lady the first time. She decided to pop up next to me, and she's popped up next to me a handful of times. And I would describe her or her presence as being very maternal and gentle and quiet, yet commanding. And St. Joseph has actually, on one occasion, very clearly come to visit me. And I would describe his presence as protective, purposeful, and also you just get this sense that he's huge, like really, really big individual. Teresa of Avila, when she's visited me, and she's visited me many times, she's kind of funny. She's sharp-tongued, witty, and very matter-of-fact. And even though I can't say it's not like she's directly communicating with me, but you can just tell she has these qualities. When St. John of the Cross has visited me, he has the qualities of being serene, simple-hearted, and poetic. And then finally, I've also had experiences of sensing the presence of my guardian angel. And that experience, I've perceived him to be tall, wise, stoic. He doesn't mess around. And just that sense that he is my advocate and advisor. And I want to get back to how Teresa of Avila describes that we can discern whether or not these visions are true, whether they are of God or not of God. And this is a quote she made on locutions, but I think it can be applied as well to visions. She said, "When our Lord speaks, it is at once a word and a work. And though the words may not be meant to stir up our devotion, but they are rather reproof, they dispose the soul at once, strengthen it, make it tender, give it light, console and calm it. And if it should be in dryness or in trouble and uneasiness, all is resolved, as if by the action of a hand. And even better, for it seems as if the Lord would have the soul understand that he is all-powerful and that his words are deeds." And so I know a hallmark for me of when an experience is authentic. Well, first of all, I always check it against church teaching. So if I experience anything through prayer and receive any knowledge or understanding and it goes against church teaching, then I immediately discard it. It's not real. If it falls in line with church teaching, that's step one. Step two would be, I often find that when these things are authentic, they create almost an instant change in your soul and the amount of virtue, where if God informs you of something or makes you aware of one of your sins, like I described, and is calling you to something more, it's like his interaction with you immediately and automatically imparts the grace to allow you to rise to the occasion for what he's leading you to. And it is an increase in virtue that really doesn't seem like it's a product of yourself. And Teresa of Avila has another couple quotes where she describes how to discern whether or not it's from a satanic source. And she says, "He who shall have had the true vision coming from God detects the false visions at once. Though they begin with a certain sweetness and joy, the soul rejects them of itself. The joy which Satan ministers must be, I think, very different. It shows no traces of pure and holy love. Satan very quickly betrays himself." So any experience you have that does not lead to that peace of serenity and joy and love, that's not of God. And then as far as being able to tell the difference between a vision that's brought about by your own imagination and that's not brought on externally by God, St. Teresa of Avila says, "If the vision were the works of man's own understanding, such a vision would not accomplish the great results of the true one, nor indeed any at all." And so that goes back to how we were talking about when you have an authentic interaction with God, it inherently produces a change in you that leads you to a higher level of virtue than you had before that event happened to you, and there's no other explanation for your sudden increase in virtue. So in summary, those are the 4 different types of visions as described by St. Teresa of Avila, the Doctor of the Church of Prayer. Hope you join me next time. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Have a good one.